No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspective, this is Revenge of the Birds. Welcome to Revenge of the Birds Radio. This is your host, Jess Root. Arizona Cardinals fans, thank you for listening. Another episode, another show, getting ready for the preseason. This week, we have Scott Bantel from Cincy Jungle, our SB Nation Cincinnati Bengals NFL blog, our team site, where, much like Revenge of the Birds, they have great content on a daily basis and probably the best community on the web that you're going to find of Bengals fans, much like for Revenge of the Birds. I don't think you can find a better community of Cardinals fans. And this show is brought to you by Audible.com, the Internet's leading audio content provider. And you can get a free trial and a free audiobook download for you guys, my listeners, at audibletrial.com, audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. And you can get yourself a free audiobook download and test out the service for a free month. Go ahead and check that out. And so now we'll bring on Scott Bantel from Bantel from Cincy Jungle. Tell us how you're doing today.
Good, Jeff. Good to join you here. Talk a little Bengals Cardinals before the most real of the fake football games.
Yes, it's the third preseason game. They're, at least for a half, it will look real, and it's on Sunday Night Football, so it's kind of like a big deal, isn't it?
It's almost going to feel like real football.
Well, first of all, there's brand new news. I just came across seeing that your young linebacker, Vontaze Burfict, a guy we're very familiar out here in Arizona, got himself a bit paid. What do you know about the deal so far? How long has this been in the works?
Well, they had talked about extending him for quite some time. I actually just heard it on my way home from work today. I took a look at it right before I got on with you. Looks to be a 4-year extension. Reports are around $20 million, which would put him towards the upper echelon of linebackers as far as contracts go. And pretty, I would say well-deserved. The guy the last 2 years has been arguably the best linebacker, certainly one of the top 5, led the league in tackles last year. So, I think he's really earned the deal. I think it's a real good signing for the Bengals.
It was interesting. Tell me about the perspectives out there in Cincinnati. I myself am an Arizona State fan. I knew when he was recruited. I saw his production at ASU. I'm a season ticket holder. And he was really enigmatic when he was at ASU. And I know part of that was just youth and immaturity. Part of it was, I don't know, because he never talks to the media, so that the whole concept of him talking to reporters now was something brand new. And there was something about him and head coach Dennis Erickson that didn't seem to jive. In that last season, his final season, he just kind of fell off the wagon a little bit. Then he went from being a top 15 projected pick to going completely undrafted. He was out of shape for the combine. How has he been? Obviously, he's been super productive on the field, one of the most surprising, one of the most valuable, in terms of value, players you can have in the league. What made the difference? Did the light just go on? Was it the coaching staff? What did they do to get him to play at this potential? Because he's always had it, but coming out of Arizona State, I wouldn't have drafted him.
Right. I think it was two things. I think one is coming out of Arizona State. Prior to coming out, he was projected to be, a top maybe 10, 15 pick, and didn't have a great last year. Did terrible at the combine, went undrafted, and I think that was kind of rock bottom for him. He kind of realized that his attitude and the things he was doing were affecting his ability to play. The second, and I think most big, probably the biggest, I guess I would say positive, is when he was drafted by Mike Zimmer. And Mike Zimmer is, a real tough love guy, no nonsense. All of his players love him. but he has a knack for taking these guys that have, fallen on hard times or, had problems, and he's done a really good job of getting them focused and getting them back to playing good football. Adam Jones is a good example. He's had some others through the years. Tank Johnson was another one. But by all accounts, Vontaze Burfict, since being here, has been a model citizen off the field and a great locker room leader on the field. So, it's weird that the Vontaze Burfict that was known when he came out of Arizona State is certainly not the Vontaze Burfict that Bengals fans have seen, which is a good thing.
Yes, and absolutely. As a fan of Arizona State Sun Devils, it's great to see him perform. It's just so it is disappointing at the same time as why did he not do that last year was there? How could he have fallen so far? Now, granted, he's been rewarded now. He's getting something. He's not top paid linebacker, but I believe I saw the Adam Schefter tweet. It's going to be $7.6 million he's getting this year. That's a nice payout, and I hope that continues because, dadgum, he's a talented kid. He's a talented kid. He has everything that you want at that at that linebacker. But that wasn't why that's not why we brought you on, is to talk about Vontaze Burfict, although that is some good news to talk about. Want to get to know a little bit more of the Bengals. They're a team that the Cardinals rarely see. So let's talk about the offseason. Kind of the biggest news has been, Vontaze Burfict got his contract, and then Andy Dalton got his contract earlier. What's kind of the pulse when it comes to Cincinnati fans on Andy Dalton and how he's played? His perception around the league is he's just kind of there. He's good enough to win you some games, or not win you the games you want. And that the team got. So what first of all, before we talk about the actual contract and whether the fans like the deal and like the extension, how is he perceived as a quarterback there by fans?
Andy Dalton in Cincinnati is a lightning rod and radio talk show gold. He's similar to, on a local level here, the Tim Tebow or Johnny Manziel, where you have a huge divide amongst the fan base on their feelings for Andy Dalton. He certainly has his supporters, and he has his detractors, and they're a very loud bunch. I don't think you're going to find anyone, myself included, that is 100% sold that Andy Dalton is a franchise quarterback. I've seen flashes. I think he can be, but, I still need to see more. And then there's the fan base that is just, he can do no right. That's a little bit on the national perception as well, is that Andy Dalton has kind of been the quarterback that's rode the coattails of a talented offense and a good defense. He just happens to be the quarterback. But this is a guy that he set franchise records last year with yards and touchdowns. He had 33 touchdowns last year, third in the league. And he took over a team as a rookie that was by many projected to go 0-16, and he went 9-7, took him to the playoffs. He's gone to the playoffs all 3 years, and I don't think you could ask for more given the situation that he came into. His struggles, though, have come in big games, primetime games, in the playoffs, and I think that's where he's getting his bad rap, is he has not succeeded and actually played very poorly in the playoffs.
So I know it's almost unfair to think if you've taken a guy in his first 3 years, he goes to the playoffs, and he hasn't won in the playoffs, and so he's a little bit behind, say Mark Sanchez, who actually won some playoff games, and then his play just kind of fell off the table into crap. Is there a fear that even with that extension that they might see that, or is the skill set good enough that do you have the anticipation, the ability that's not going to happen?
I don't think I think with Andy Dalton, you're pretty clear on what you're going to get. I think he's got a very low floor, but his ceiling may not be that high. So every year he's thrown, I think, like 20, 27, and 33 touchdown passes.
Which is great. Good. That's good.
Right? And his interceptions have been between like 13 and 20, which is the bad. I don't know that he's ever going to be an elite quarterback, Like I said, I'm not sure he's ever going to be like a franchise-type quarterback that's going to take over games for you. But he's also not a game manager. He's good enough to win with. You can, last year in the game against the Jets, I think he had 5 touchdown passes. You'll see those flashes. He's a very rhythmic quarterback. When he's in rhythm, he's very good. When he's out of rhythm, he can be very bad. There may not be a quarterback in the league that has a greater difference between his good and his bad as Andy Dalton. And I think that's where the frustration comes in with the fans. But, he's a guy that, I like Andy Dalton. And if he's surrounded by talent like he is, I think he can win.
Interesting. So he's kind of like a poor man's Eli Manning. I know people say Eli Manning is when he's good, he's elite. But we've seen a really bad Eli Manning, too. Would you compare him to that?
Well, Manning certainly has 2 Super Bowl rings, so I'd like Dalton to get those.
Obviously, yes.
I would gladly compare him then. I don't think he makes as many mistakes as Manning does. Manning can take over a game like I don't think Dalton can, or at least hasn't shown yet. Manning has also shown the ability to rise in big games. But I think Manning is more prone to making big mistakes, as you can see. Last year he had like 30 interceptions, something like that.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible.
So I guess a poor man's Manning isn't a bad description. I don't think his lows are as low as Manning. I don't think his highs are as high as Manning. He's somewhere in between there.
Okay. Now let's connect Dalton. Let's talk a little bit about a guy that you guys should be familiar with, and that's Carson Palmer. How is Palmer perceived by Bengals fans? Obviously, he was top of the line before the injuries, was considered perhaps one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. It ended messy. What's the perception of Palmer these days in Cincinnati? Has he been forgotten? Are there still hard feelings? Were there hard feelings in terms of fans?
I think most of the fans understood his reason for not wanting to play. Certainly in Cincinnati, we've seen star players not want to play for this management team before. I think the issue that fans had was he had recently signed a big contract, and I think their thought was, if you didn't want to play here, you didn't have to sign that contract. You could have just walked after free agency. I think initially there were some sour grapes, but it was because of the Palmer trade that got them Andy Dalton. So the fact that Dalton has filled in and done so well, I think for the most part, the sour feelings, maybe a little bit still there, but I think they've mostly forgotten about it because now we have a quarterback that's doing well, and Palmer's doing fairly
well-ish,
successful. Yeah, well-ish.
He's doing well-ish,
right? So I think given the situation, the anger towards him is certainly past, I think.
Okay, so let's talk about more about the offseason. So the big thing was Dalton's contract. We got a little bit more. We have a big thing now with the Burfict contract. Personnel-wise, who left? It seems to me as not a Cincinnati Bengals know-it-all by any means. So I looked down some of the transactions. It looked like you guys had a fairly, outside of the coaching staff, but in terms of player personnel, you guys had a fairly quiet offseason, not really too many people leaving, not too many people coming in. Who left, who stayed, and who came? Yeah,
and that's pretty normal for the Bengals. They're not very active in the free agency as far as going outside the organization. They have really bought into the idea of developing and signing their own and not paying big money for free agents outside of their walls. The guys that left, the biggest would be Michael Johnson, defensive end, signed a big deal down in Tampa. Was a good player, had a couple good years of 9 to 10-ish sacks, and he was a starter last year. But I don't think it's going to be a huge loss, especially from a production standpoint. He was a very good locker room guy. From a production standpoint, he had 3.5 sacks, and his backup actually had 7.5. So
Yeah.
So I don't think they lose a whole lot. They also lost Anthony Collins, again, a big deal to Tampa, but he was a third tackle. The Bengals have a Pro Bowl tackle in Whitworth, another pretty good tackle in Andre Smith on the other side, and Collins was a really good backup tackle, and he'll start and he'll do fine, but they just didn't have the money to have three well-paid tackles on their team. So he got a deal down there. Again, it won't be a huge loss because he wasn't a starter on this team anyway. They lost James Harrison, big name, but he really contributed almost nothing last year. Yeah.
As they say, a shell of himself.
Yeah, he really was, and he just didn't fit into the Bengals' defensive scheme either. The biggest loss, I think, overall would have been Mike Zimmer. The players really played well for Zimmer. He really, had this defense up to a elite level. The guy that filled in for him, I like what I've seen so far. He coached under Zimmer for a couple years, but I would expect there to be a little bit of a drop-off there. They did lose their offensive coordinator in Jay Gruden to the Redskins. I actually think that's going to help them. I wasn't a huge fan of Gruden as an offensive coordinator. They replaced him with Hugh Jackson, the Raiders' old coach, and I think he's going to have a better offensive scheme for Dalton and this offense.
Well, that's good. That's good. Let's talk about the draft class. Who were the big names that you guys picked up, that you selected, and how are they doing so far?
All indications are pretty good. They picked Darqueze Dennard, the cornerback from Michigan State. Most boards had him as the top or second-ranked cornerback. I think from a pro-ready standpoint, he was certainly the best cornerback. His ceiling may not be as high as Justin Gilbert, the guy that the Browns took, but, he's a guy that very well could start. On most teams, probably would start. Will likely end up being the nickel cornerback for this team for the most part. He's been very solid in training camp so far. He's looked good in the preseason games, and the coaching staff seems to be really happy. Their second-round pick was another pick that's seemingly doing very well. It was running back from LSU, Jeremy Hill. He's a big back. He's 6'1", 230, and had a really productive career at LSU, and will be, from all indications, the big back behind Gio Bernard. So Bernard will definitely be the starter, but from a short yard standpoint, from a power back standpoint, Jeremy Hill looks to be the one that's going to get those carries. No longer Ben Jarvis Green Ellis. Beyond that, their third-round pick hasn't gotten great reviews. Whether or not he makes the team, that stands. That'll be. It's a defensive tackle from West Virginia, Will Clark. Outside that, those are actually fourth round. They took a center, Russell Bodine, who's going to start at center for them this year. You don't see a lot of rookies start at center, but they're really high on this guy, and so he will be their starting center come week 1.
That's good. That's good. All right. In terms of off-season, you have your rookies. Tell us about the off-season overall. Who stood out in minicamp and off-season workouts? Who has stood out in training camp, and who has flashed in the preseason in terms of young guys, returning guys, veteran guys? Who's looked really good and who's looked disappointing so far?
From a good standpoint, the biggest one right now I think would be Mohamed Sanu, who is generally their slot receiver, but is going to be bumped up probably to their number 2 because their number 2 receiver, Marvin Jones, broke his foot about a week ago. So Mohamed Sanu will fill in that number 2 role, and he's looked really good. You may recall he was the receiver 2 years back that got the fake draft call during the draft. That's him, and so he's generally the slot guy, but he's done well in the number 2 role, and he's looked really good in camp. Other guys that have looked good, Giovanni Bernard has continued to look good. Dalton's looked really good. In the preseason, their second game against the Jets, he went 8 for 8 with a touchdown. He's had two long completions already So he's looked really sharp. As far as bad, their backup that they signed, Jason Campbell, has not looked good.
He's still in the league, though. I mean, he's going to make himself some money being a backup for every team in the league, I think.
Yes, yeah. And he's better than the backups they've had in the past, but he has not looked good so far. Other than that, I don't see anyone that's been too disappointing in the preseason so far. One other guy that's looked very good was their rookie from last year, Tyler Eifert, the tight end from Notre Dame. He didn't have a lot of production his rookie year, but all indications are he looks really good in preseason and should have a bigger role in this offense in 2014.
So here's a question. Was Campbell brought on, which is kind of interesting, when Bruce Arians was hired by the Cardinals, one of the first things they went and did is sign Drew Stanton. At first it looked like he might be the starter, but then they traded for Palmer. But one of the things with Stanton is that he knew Bruce Arians' office. He had complete trust in him. Was Jason Campbell a signing because of Hugh Jackson?
I think so. Campbell was Hugh Jackson's quarterback out in Oakland when Hugh was the head coach, and in fact, he actually played well under Hugh Jackson out there. He had a really good year in Oakland, and in fact, it's kind of ironic. It was Campbell's injury right before the trade deadline that caused the Oakland Raiders to trade for Palmer. Hugh Jackson wanted Palmer. They traded for Palmer, and the rest is history. But it's kind of ironic that now Hugh brings him back as the backup here in Cincinnati.
Well, I was wondering that because there tends to be with offensive coordinators, head coaches, when it comes to their backups, they want guys that they can trust, whether they look great or not. And I'll tell you, last year in the preseason, Drew Stanton looked really erratic. He's looked pretty good so far this offseason. Not that anyone expects him to play, because most people know when you've got a clear number one, if you end up with the backup playing, something's wrong with your season. You don't want to see that happen. So obviously, the Cincinnati came out of the division last year. What is the outlook and expectation level by fans, by the team? What are they talking about? And there's some one, I myself included, think that they are a team that, because of the coaching turnover, would be one of those teams that is ripe for that regression. What do you say to that, and what are the expectations within the locker room, realistically, and what are fans expecting from those Bengals this year?
Sure. I think nationally, it seems like most believe it's a three-team race between the Steelers, the Bengals, the Ravens, and it seems like most nationally have either the Ravens or the Steelers winning. I tend to feel like the Bengals will win the division again. I think most fans, the expectation, certainly the team's expectation, is a division title, and I don't think anyone, fans or team included, would consider this season a success if it does not end with at least a playoff victory. With a team that's been there 3 years straight, it's kind of, it's time to make some forward movement and actually win in the playoffs.
So, how much does the noise level go up then if they are a one-and-done team? It's in terms of how they view Andy Dalton, the team in general, Marvin Lewis, who he's still there. He's been there forever, and still hasn't been able to get that monkey off his back. How loud does that noise get, especially in terms of coaching staff, the head coaching job, and then Andy Dalton if they one and done, if they make the playoffs and lose again in that first game?
Well, the difference between the fans and this management team is great. From a fan standpoint, they've been calling for Marvin Lewis's job for years, especially after the 4-12 season when Palmer left. Lewis's contract was up and they re-signed him. Certainly, the fans were not on board with that. Lewis has done a very good job. He's taken this team, this franchise, to places they haven't been in the past from a consistent winning standpoint. But, no other coach with the exception of Jim Mora, has more playoff appearances without a win than Marvin Lewis. And, at some point, I don't know if this management will fire him or not, but at some point, you got to win in the playoffs. And same with Dalton. Fans wanted his head around here as well. 0-3 in the playoffs. If he goes to 0-4, I may just turn off my radio for a couple months.
All right. Well, Scott, I really appreciate that. Now, we got the game. Actually, before we close, prematurely, the game on Sunday. What's the game plan, at least with the starters? The Cardinals are planning on playing their starters no more than a half, which surprises me because kind of like the game plan I've seen before is to play a half and maybe a series or two so they can work on those halftime adjustments. What does the game plan look like so far in terms of personnel and how long we'll be seeing the starters?
Well, Marvin Lewis has a pretty long track record here, and in the past, Game 3 for him has normally been the starters are in there for about the first half. There's been a couple years where they've gone a series or two in the second, but generally that's when you have a lot of new pieces or the first unit is struggling. This is a unit that's well oiled. They don't have a lot of new pieces. And they've been playing well in the preseason, so I would be surprised if they go any longer than the first half. I would say the first half is probably you'll see mostly starters, and after that, backups. It is a new offensive coordinator, but like I said, Hugh Jackson was here last year, and they seem to picked up very well in his system. So, again, it'll probably be the same as the Cardinals. I would bet you're going to see both teams play starters the first half, and second half we'll see the backups. And
then we'll see the epic battle of Drew Stanton and Jason Campbell. The matchup everyone is waiting for in the entire league.
Well, you may get another Arizona guy. Campbell's a little bit dinged up right now. You may get Matt Scott.
Ooh. Hey, the Vomit Kid. He's got heart. He's got heart. Throw up and throw a touchdown. That's right. Well, good stuff. Scott, I really appreciate the time here on the show with us here at Revenge of the Birds Radio. How can fans follow you if you're on Twitter? And what do you have going on there at Cincy Jungle right now?
Sure, absolutely. The fans can follow me at scottbantel.com. I'm sorry, at Scott Bantel. They can follow us. We're Bengals fans or upcoming Bengals opponents at cincyjungle.com. Much like Revenge of the Birds, best Bengals content around. I may be biased, but I do feel that way.
I know how you feel.
So that's how they can follow me. That's how they can follow us and the Bengals as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much once again. We will see how things go on Saturday, and of course, I've written some answers to you. You'll have some content up for your fans. I will cross-post that, put that up on our site as well, so they can see how the conversation goes. Oh, by the way, as a side note, does Cincy Jungle have a one-day waiting period, or is it longer than that for commenting?
I'm actually not sure. I think it's 1 day, which I think is pretty standard with the SB Nation sites. I believe it's 1 day. So if they wanna comment or give me some flack, they need to sign up now, and so they can get in there by Sunday.
All right. Well, thanks again, Scott. You have a wonderful day. I appreciate the time.
Sure, Jess. Thanks for having me.
All right. You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.